I had just sat down to sign the oil survey paperwork when the office door swung open. Gerald Hutchins walked in with Sheriff Lewis. No greeting, no questions. He dropped a folder on the table. "You don't have the right to sign anything. The mineral rights to this land have belonged to the HOA since 2005. I looked down at Amendment 12B. Uncle Roy's signature sat in the bottom right corner. The problem was, my uncle had late-stage Parkinson's that year. He couldn't hold a pen. If you've ever had someone shove forged documents in your face and tell you that your property isn't yours, stick around. This is how I made them regret every signature they faked." Gerald Hutchins smiled the entire time. That was the detail I couldn't shake as I drove away from his office. The way he looked at me like I was a minor inconvenience, a speed bump on his way to something much larger. Sheriff Lewis had stood by the door with his arms crossed, not saying a word, just making sure I understood the message. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a notification. I pulled into the county recorder's office parking lot 20 minutes later, still running the numbers in my head. Amendment 12B, dated November 2005. Uncle Roy's signature, notarized, recorded, except none of it made sense. I had visited Uncle Roy in the fall of 2005. His Parkinson's had progressed to the point where he had lost fine motor control entirely. Medical records from that period documented his inability to perform basic manual tasks. The idea that he signed a legal document transferring mineral rights to the HOA was not just unlikely, it was clinically impossible. The clerk at the county recorder's office was a woman in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and a name tag that said Martha Campbell. I asked to see the original filing for Amendment 12B, Ridgewood Rural HOA, dated November 2005. She typed something into her computer, frowned, typed again, then looked up. "That file is currently under administrative review," she said. "You'll need to submit a formal request. Processing time is approximately 30 days. I asked what administrative review meant. She didn't answer. I asked who initiated the review. She said she wasn't authorized to disclose that information. I asked if I could at least verify the recording date. She turned her monitor slightly away from me and said, "Sir, I've told you what I can. 30 days. I left my contact information and walked out. The whole exchange took less than 4 minutes. I spent the next 3 hours calling every real estate attorney within 50 miles of Midland. The first one listened for about 90 seconds before interrupting. "I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson, but I have a conflict of interest with one of the parties involved." The second one said almost the same thing, word for word. The third one was more direct. "Look," he said, "I don't know what you're walking into, but Gerald Hutchins has been doing business in this county for 30 years. Half the attorneys here have done title work for his company at some point. You're not going to find local representation. My advice? Get someone from Austin or Houston, someone who doesn't need to live here after the case is over." I thanked him and hung up. The message was clear. Gerald Hutchins didn't just control the HOA, he controlled the ecosystem, the lawyers, the clerks, probably the sheriff too. Anyone who wanted to work in Ridgewood County played by his rules. That night, I sat in my motel room with my laptop open, running searches on everything I could find about Ridgewood Rural HOA and Hutchins Land and Title. Most of it was routine, property transfers, title insurance filings, the occasional zoning dispute, but one article caught my attention. It was from the Midland Reporter-Telegram, dated 3 years ago. "Permian Energy acquires survey rights in Ridgewood area, exploration expected within 5 years. The article mentioned that preliminary geological assessments suggested significant oil deposits beneath several rural parcels. No specific landowners were named, but the map included in the article showed a shaded zone that covered Uncle Roy's property almost exactly. Gerald Hutchins had known about the oil for at least 3 years. He had waited for Uncle Roy to die, waited for some clueless nephew from Houston to inherit a worthless, bankrupt farm, then showed up with a forged document, expecting me to disappear. I closed the laptop and opened my briefcase. Somewhere in the county recorder's database, there was a timestamp. The actual date Amendment 12B was entered into the system. Gerald claimed it was recorded in 2005, but records don't lie the way people do. If that amendment was filed recently, there would be a digital trail. I called Aunt Maggie the next morning. She lived in a memory care facility outside Dallas now, and most days she didn't remember what year it was. But when I mentioned Uncle Roy and the HOA, something shifted in her voice. "They came to the house," she said slowly. "2 men, maybe 3. They had papers. Roy told them to leave. He said he would never sign anything over to those people." I asked her if she remembered when this happened. "Before he got really bad," she said. "Maybe 2003, 2004. He was so angry afterward. He said they were trying to steal from him." I asked if Uncle Roy ever mentioned keeping any documents. She was quiet for a long moment. "There's a tin box, she said finally. "Under the bed in the farmhouse. Roy kept important things in there. He told me once, if anything ever happened, that box would prove everything." The tin box was exactly where she said it would be. Rusted, covered in dust, untouched for years. Inside letters, receipts, a copy of the original deed, and a certified letter dated March 2004, addressed to Ridgewood Rural HOA. The subject line read, "Formal refusal of mineral rights transfer request." Uncle Roy hadn't just refused to sign. He had put it in writing. Word travels fast in small towns. Word travels faster when someone like Gerald Hutchins wants it to. I walked into the diner on Main Street the next morning, looking for coffee and a quiet place to review the documents from Uncle Roy's tin box. The moment I stepped through the door, every conversation stopped. 8 people turned to look at me. Nobody smiled, nobody nodded. The waitress behind the counter, a woman in her 60s with a name tag that said Doris, watched me approach with her arms folded across her chest. I asked for a table. She didn't move. "We're full," she said. I looked around. At least 4 tables were empty. "I can see open tables right there," I said. She picked up a rag and started wiping the counter without looking at me. "Those are reserved." I stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I turned and walked out. As the door closed behind me, I heard someone mutter, loud enough for me to catch it, "City lawyer thinks he can come here and take what ain't his." The pattern repeated everywhere I went. The gas station attendant took an unusually long time processing my credit card, then said the pump was malfunctioning, and I'd have to try somewhere else. The motel manager informed me that my reservation had been accidentally canceled and that they were fully booked for the foreseeable future. I found another motel 40 minutes outside of town, the kind of place that didn't ask questions as long as you paid cash up front. That night, I came back to find my rental car blocked in by a pickup truck with no plates. I called the local police. The deputy showed up an hour later, ran the truck through the system, found nothing, and told me there wasn't much he could do. "Probably just some kids," he said. "You might want to park somewhere more visible next time." He didn't offer to help move the truck. I didn't expect him to. The next morning, Sheriff Dale Lewis himself called my cell phone. His voice was friendly, almost warm. Mr. Anderson, I just wanted to reach out personally. There's been some concern in the community about your activities here. People are saying you've been asking a lot of questions, digging into records, making folks uncomfortable." I told him I was exercising my legal right to investigate a property dispute. He chuckled. Sure. I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong. I'm just saying this is a tight-knit community. People look out for each other here. And when an outsider comes in, stirring things up, well, it can create tension. Tension leads to misunderstandings. Misunderstandings lead to problems. I asked if he was threatening me. Threatening? No. Just friendly advice. Small towns have long memories. Mr. Anderson, you might win whatever fight you're picking, but you'll never be able to set foot in this county again without looking over your shoulder. He hung up before I could respond. I spent the rest of the day going through Uncle Roy's documents. The certified refusal letter was damning on its own, but it wasn't enough. I needed to understand the full scope of what Gerald had been doing, and whether Uncle Roy was his only target. The tin box contained more than just letters. There was a small leather notebook, the kind Uncle Roy used to carry in his shirt pocket. The handwriting was shaky but legible, dated entries spanning from 2003 to 2006. Most of it was mundane, weather notes, feed prices, equipment repairs, but scattered throughout were references to the HOA, March 2003. Hutchins came by again, wants me to sign over mineral rights in exchange for road maintenance. Told him no. June 2003. Got another letter from HOA, same demand, same answer. October 2003. Two men showed up at the house, said they worked for Hutchins, wanted me to reconsider. Maggie was scared. I told them to get off my land. And then, in December 2003, an entry that made me stop. Hernandez was with them this time. Wouldn't look me in the eye. I think he knows what they're doing is wrong. Hernandez. I flipped through more pages. The name appeared 3 more times, always in connection with visits from Hutchins' people, always described as reluctant, uncomfortable, present but not participating. The last entry mentioning him was from February 2004. Hernandez called the house, said he couldn't be part of this anymore, said he was sorry, told me to keep records of everything. I opened my laptop and searched for Hernandez, combined with Hutchins Land and Title and Ridgewood. It took 15 minutes, but I found him. Eric Hernandez, former employee of Hutchins Land and Title, terminated in 2004. No public record of why. Current address listed as a trailer park, 23 miles east of Midland. I checked the time. It was almost 8 in the evening. I grabbed my keys anyway. The trailer park was exactly what you'd expect. A grid of rusting mobile homes, half of them dark, the other half lit by the blue glow of television screens. Lot 17 was at the back, a single wide with a torn awning and a pickup truck that looked like it hadn't moved in years. A light was on inside. I knocked. For a long moment, nothing. Then footsteps, and a man's voice through the door, rough and wary. "If Hutchins sent you, you can tell him I still have copies of everything." I didn't move. "My name is Dylan Anderson," I said. "Roy Anderson was my uncle. I think you knew him." The door opened 3 inches, held by a chain. A face appeared in the gap, mid-40s, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed but sharp. "Roy's dead," he said. It wasn't a question. 8 months ago, I said. "And now Gerald Hutchins is trying to take his land with a forged signature." Eric Hernandez stared at me for a long moment. Then he undid the chain. "You'd better come inside," he said. "There's a lot you don't know." Eric Hernandez's trailer smelled like stale cigarettes and instant coffee. He didn't offer me a seat, but he didn't tell me to leave either. He just stood in the middle of his cramped living room, arms crossed, watching me like he was trying to decide whether I was worth the risk. "I worked for Hutchins Land and Title for 6 years, he said finally. Title searches, document prep, closings, boring stuff, mostly. But around 2003, things started to change. He walked to a battered filing cabinet in the corner and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside were folders, dozens of them, crammed together so tightly the drawer barely closed. Gerald started asking me to witness signatures, not regular closings. These were different. He'd tell me to meet him at someone's house, always older folks, always out in the rural areas, people with land but no money. He pulled out a folder and handed it to me. "This one's from 2003. Widow named Eleanor Vance, 82 years old, with advanced dementia. I went to her house with Gerald and a notary he used for special jobs. Eleanor couldn't remember her own daughter's name, but somehow she signed a document transferring her mineral rights to a holding company Gerald controlled." He pointed to the signature on the page. "Look at that. Clean, steady, perfectly legible. Eleanor Vance couldn't write a grocery list by then. I know because I watched her try." I looked at the signature. No tremor, no hesitation, uniform pressure throughout, the handwriting of a healthy person, not an 82-year-old with dementia. "I was supposed to sign as a witness," Eric said. "I refused. Gerald told me I was making a mistake. 2 weeks later, I was terminated. Official reason, performance issues. Real reason I wouldn't play along." He handed me more folders, 7 in total, spanning 2003 to 2005. I spread them across Eric's kitchen table and built a timeline. Column 1, landowner name. Column 2, date of signature. Column 3, medical condition at time of signing. Column 4, witness names. Column 5, receiving entity. Eleanor Vance, dementia, 2003. Harold Brennan, post-stroke paralysis, 2003. Margaret Liu, late-stage Parkinson's, 2004. Samuel Odom, Alzheimer's, 2004. Ruth Castellano, dementia, 2005. 2 others deceased within months of transfer, families never notified. All 7 properties fell within the Permian Energy Geological Survey Zone. All 7 mineral rights now belong to shell companies linked to Gerald Hutchins. Your uncle was supposed to be number 8, Eric said. He was leaning against the counter now, watching me work. Gerald had been pressuring him for years. Roy kept refusing. Then Roy got sick, and Gerald figured it was just a matter of time. I looked up. You knew my uncle, Eric nodded. I warned him, told him to send everything certified mail, keep copies, and document every interaction. That's why Gerald fired me, not just because I wouldn't witness, but because he found out I'd helped Roy fight back. He paused. When did Gerald file that Amendment 12B? I thought back to the county recorder's office. Martha Campbell had blocked my access, but the confirmation receipt included a document tracking number. I don't know when it was originally filed, I said, but I can find out. Eric shook his head. You won't find the truth in those records. Martha Campbell is Sheriff Lewis's cousin. Every document Gerald needs filed gets filed. Every document that might cause problems disappears into administrative review. It's been working for 20 years. I photographed every document Eric had given me. Then I made copies on his ancient printer, one set for me, one set to mail to a secure location outside the county. Before I left, I asked Eric why he had kept all this. Why not destroy it and move on? He looked at me for a long moment, because someday someone was going to come looking, and when they did, I wanted to be able to prove I wasn't part of it. He walked me to the door. You're a lawyer, right? I nodded. Then you know what you're looking at. This isn't just fraud. This is RICO territory. I didn't disagree. I drove back to my motel and called Judith Evans, a mineral rights attorney based in Austin, the best in the state according to 3 colleagues. I had sent her a summary 2 days ago. Now I sent her the photographs from Eric's files. She called back within an hour. Dylan, she said, her voice flat and serious. You're describing a quiet title scheme at scale, forged signatures, inside access to county records, shell companies, vulnerable victims. If these documents cross state lines, and they almost certainly did, you're looking at federal jurisdiction, wire fraud, mail fraud, RICO. She paused. But you need to understand something. Gerald Hutchins has been doing this for 20 years. He has the sheriff, the county clerk, and probably half the local judiciary. You're not going to beat him with folders and a willing witness. You need documentation that proves intent, records showing he knew what he was doing was illegal and did it anyway. I thought about Amendment 12B. The document Gerald claimed was filed in 2005. The document I suspected was filed much more recently. I think I know where to find it, I said. The next 3 days, I became a ghost in my own investigation. I didn't go back to Midland. I didn't call the county recorder's office. I didn't give Gerald Hutchins or Sheriff Lewis any indication of what I was building. Instead, I worked from a list, the 7 names from Eric's files, 7 families who had lost mineral rights under suspicious circumstances, 7 potential witnesses who might be willing to talk. I started with the ones who had moved away. They were safer, harder for Gerald to reach, and less afraid of local consequences. The Brennan family had relocated to New Mexico after Harold's death in 2004. His daughter, Patricia, answered the phone on the 3rd ring. When I explained who I was and why I was calling, she went silent for almost 30 seconds. Then she said, I always knew something was wrong with those papers. My father couldn't hold a fork by the end. There's no way he signed anything. Patricia Brennan agreed to provide a written statement. She also gave me something I hadn't expected, emails. Her father had received 3 messages from Hutchins Land and Title in the months before the alleged transfer, all offering estate planning assistance and mineral rights consultation. The language was carefully crafted, never explicitly threatening, but the implication was clear sign now, or risk losing everything to taxes and legal complications. They made it sound like they were helping, Patricia said, like my father would be stupid not to take the deal. I asked if she had ever reported her suspicions. To whom, she said. The sheriff, the county clerk. Everyone in that town works for Gerald Hutchins. We just wanted to get out. I thanked her and moved to the next name on the list. The Liu family wouldn't talk. When I reached Margaret Liu's son by phone, He listened for about 45 seconds before cutting me off. "I don't know who you are, and I don't care. We're not getting involved in anything related to Ridgewood County. Don't call this number again." He hung up. The Castellano family was the same. A niece who had inherited Ruth's remaining property told me she had been advised by her attorney not to discuss anything related to the mineral rights transfer. Advised by who? I asked. She didn't answer. Two families are afraid to speak. Two families who had clearly been warned. That told me something. Two, the Odom family was different. Samuel Odom's grandson, Marcus, lived in Houston, only 40 minutes from my apartment. We met at a coffee shop near Rice University. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, with the kind of quiet intensity that suggested he had been thinking about this for a long time. "My grandfather had Alzheimer's," he said. "By 2004, he didn't know what year it was. He thought my mother was his sister. He couldn't balance a checkbook or remember his own address." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph, a signature on a mineral rights transfer document. "That's supposed to be his handwriting, but look at this." He swiped to another image, a birthday card Samuel had written to Marcus in 2003, just a year before the transfer. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, letters drifting off the baseline, nothing like the clean, steady signature on the legal document. "I've been sitting on this for years," Marcus said. "I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I told him about Eric Hernandez. I told him about the other families. I told him about Uncle Roy. By the end of the conversation, Marcus Odom had agreed to testify if it came to that. I now had two families willing to go on record, Patricia Brennan and Marcus Odom, two witnesses who could establish a pattern of forged signatures targeting incapacitated landowners. Combined with Eric's internal documents and Uncle Roy's certified refusal letter, the evidence was starting to lock together. But Judith Evans had been clear pattern evidence wasn't enough. I needed proof of intent. I needed documentation showing that Gerald Hutchins knew what he was doing was illegal and proceeded anyway. Judith called me that evening with news. "I've been digging into Gerald's corporate filings," she said. 3 years ago, he registered an LLC called Ridgewood Energy Partners, single-member LLC, Gerald Hutchins as sole owner. I asked what the LLC did. On paper, nothing, no employees, no revenue, no business activity. But 6 months after registration, Ridgewood Energy Partners signed a preliminary agreement with Permian Energy for mineral extraction rights. She paused. "Dylan, the agreement covers 8 properties. All 8 are in the Geological Survey Zone. 7 of them are the properties from Eric's files, the forged transfers. The 8th is your uncle's land." The picture snapped into focus. Gerald hadn't just been stealing mineral rights for future speculation. He had already made a deal. Permian Energy had agreed to pay for extraction rights on properties Gerald didn't legally own, properties he had acquired through fraud. The LLC was the vehicle, the forged signatures were the mechanism, and Amendment 12B was the final piece he needed to complete the set. "There's more," Judith said. "I pulled the preliminary agreement from Permian Energy's SEC filings. The deal is contingent on Gerald providing a clear title to all 8 properties by the end of this year. If he can't deliver a clear title, the agreement terminates." I understood immediately. Gerald was on a deadline. He had promised Permian Energy something he couldn't deliver unless he forced me out of the picture. That explained the pressure, the sheriff's involvement, the coordinated hostility. He wasn't just protecting an old scheme. He was racing to close a deal worth millions before it fell apart. I checked my mailbox at the motel that night. Among the junk mail and circulars was an envelope with the Ridgewood Rural HOA logo in the corner. Inside was a single document, Notice of Leanne, Anderson Property. The letter stated that the estate of Roy Anderson owed $47,000 in accumulated maintenance fees, special assessments, and administrative penalties dating back 15 years. If the balance was not paid within 60 days, the HOA would initiate foreclosure proceedings to recover the debt. I read it twice, then called Judith. "They're not going to fight you on the mineral rights," she said, her voice grim. "They don't need to. If they take the land through a tax lien foreclosure, the mineral rights transfer automatically. Gerald doesn't have to prove Amendment 12B is valid. He just has to make sure you lose the property before you can prove it's not. 60 days. That was how long I had to dismantle a 20-year conspiracy, expose a network of forged documents, and prove that one of the most powerful men in Ridgewood County was a criminal. I looked at the lien notice again. $47,000 I didn't have, for fees that had almost certainly been fabricated. Gerald Hutchins wasn't just trying to steal my land. He was trying to bury me in paperwork so deep I'd never climb out. The difference was, I knew how to read paperwork, and I was just getting started. Gerald Hutchins made his first public move 3 days after the lien notice arrived. I found out about it the way most people find out about things in small towns, secondhand, through someone who thought I should know. Judith forwarded me a screenshot from the Ridgewood Community Forum, a local social media group with over 2,000 members. Gerald had posted under his official HOA president account, Community Alert. It has come to my attention that an outside individual is attempting to disrupt our community by making false claims about property ownership and spreading misinformation about the HOA. This person has been harassing local businesses, intimidating longtime residents, and attempting to access confidential county records under pretenses. I urge all residents to report any suspicious activity to Sheriff Lewis immediately. We will not allow outsiders to undermine the trust and stability we have built together. The post had 163 reactions and 47 comments, most of them variations of "thank you for protecting us" and "these city people think they can come here and take what they want." I saved the screenshot and kept reading. 2 hours after Gerald's post, Sheriff Dale Lewis pulled into the motel parking lot. I watched him from my window as he got out of his cruiser, adjusted his belt, and walked toward the front office. 10 minutes later, the motel manager knocked on my door. "Sheriff wants to talk to you," he said, not meeting my eyes. "He's waiting in the lot." I walked outside. Lewis was leaning against his cruiser, arms crossed, mirrored sunglasses hiding his expression. Mr. Anderson," he said, "we've received some concerning reports. Multiple community members have alleged that you've been obtaining documents through fraudulent means, impersonating officials, accessing restricted files." I asked who had made these allegations. He smiled. "That's part of an ongoing investigation. I can't disclose specifics, but I'm going to need you to come down to the station tomorrow morning for a formal interview. 9 a.m., don't be late." He got back in his cruiser and drove away without waiting for a response. I understood what was happening. Gerald had shifted from defense to offense. The community post was reputation warfare, poisoning public opinion, so that anything I said would be dismissed as the ravings of a troublemaker. The sheriff's investigation was procedural intimidation, forcing me to spend time and energy defending myself against fabricated allegations instead of building my case. And the lien notice was the financial kill shot, threatening to take the land before I could prove it was mine. 3 simultaneous attacks, all designed to make me feel surrounded, overwhelmed, outmatched. The old version of me might have panicked, might have called Gerald to negotiate, or hired a local attorney to smooth things over, or simply walked away and let Uncle Roy's legacy disappear into Gerald's portfolio. But I wasn't the old version of me anymore. I had spent 15 years as a litigator. I knew how to fight in courtrooms, in depositions, in paper trails that stretched across years. Gerald Hutchins thought he was dealing with a grieving nephew who had stumbled into something too big to handle. He was wrong. I spent that night drafting documents. The first was a formal complaint to the Texas Attorney General's office, Civil Litigation Division. I outlined the pattern of forged signatures, the systematic targeting of incapacitated landowners, the shell company structure, and the timeline of property transfers. I included Eric Hernandez as a named witness, attached copies of his documents, and referenced the Brennan and Odom families as additional corroborating sources. The complaint was 18 pages long, with 43 exhibits. I sent it certified mail with delivery confirmation. The second document was a quiet title lawsuit filed in Travis County District Court, outside Ridgewood County's jurisdiction. The suit named Gerald Hutchins, Hutchins Land and Title, Ridgewood Energy Partners, LLC, and Ridgewood Rural HOA as defendants. It demanded that the court determine the true ownership of the mineral rights to Uncle Roy's property and declare Amendment 12B void as a fraudulently executed document. Filing in Travis County meant the case would be heard by judges who didn't play golf with Gerald Hutchins. It also meant discovery, the legal process that would force Gerald to produce every document, every email, every internal communication related to the Anderson property. The third action was a FOIA request to Ridgewood County, demanding all records related to Hutchins' land and title transactions over the past 10 years, all communications between Gerald Hutchins and county officials, and the complete filing history of Amendment 12B, including the original submission date and any modifications. I knew the county would stall. Martha Campbell would bury the request in administrative review, as she had done with everything else. So, I sent a duplicate copy to Councilwoman Diana Martin's office. Judith had mentioned her name. She was the one member of the county council who had publicly questioned Gerald's influence. She didn't have the power to force compliance, but she had the platform to make the county's stonewalling visible. Sometimes visibility was enough. I showed up at the sheriff's station at 9 a.m. the next morning, exactly as instructed. I brought a voice recorder, which I placed on the table and announced I would be using for my own records. Sheriff Lewis didn't like that. The interview lasted 45 minutes. He asked where I had obtained certain documents. I told him they were provided by witnesses with direct knowledge of the matters in question. He asked if I had accessed county records under pretenses. I told him I had submitted lawful public records requests and received confirmation receipts for each one. He asked if I was aware that making false statements to county officials was a criminal offense. I told him I was aware and that I had made no false statements. By the end, it was clear he had nothing. The investigation was theater, a paper-thin justification to put me in a room and remind me who controlled the local machinery. I walked out without being charged, arrested, or detained. One attack neutralized. That afternoon, Judith called with an update. Permian Energy is getting nervous, she said. Their legal team reached out to me, professional courtesy, lawyer to lawyer. They wanted to know if there was substance to the claims against Gerald. I asked what she told them. The truth, that there's an active complaint with the Attorney General, a quiet title suit pending, and documentary evidence of forged signatures across multiple properties. She paused. They're reconsidering the preliminary agreement. If Gerald can't deliver a clear title, they'll walk away from the deal entirely. Gerald's entire scheme depended on that Permian Energy contract, millions of dollars in extraction rights, contingent on the controlling properties he had stolen. If Permian walked, his leverage collapsed. That evening, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize, a generic Gmail account with a string of numbers. No subject line, no greeting, just an attachment and a single sentence. They made us vote, most didn't understand. I opened the attachment. It was a scanned document, minutes from a Ridgewood Rural HOA board meeting, dated August 2020. Agenda Item 4. Acquisition Strategy for Dormant Mineral Rights, presentation by G. Hutchins. The minutes summarize Gerald's proposal. Identify properties with unclear title status. Approach owners with assistance offers. And consolidate rights under HOA-affiliated entities. At the bottom of the page, someone had written in blue ink, "Is this even legal?" The handwriting was shaky, uncertain, not Gerald's. One of the board members had questioned the plan. One of them had known something was wrong. And now, 3 years later, one of them had decided to talk. The Ridgewood County Council chamber had never been this full. 123 residents packed the wooden benches, stood along the walls, and spilled into the hallway outside. The air conditioning couldn't keep up with the body heat. Someone had propped open the side doors, letting in the late afternoon sun and the distant hum of traffic from the county road. Councilwoman Diana Martin sat at the center of the raised dais, flanked by 2 other council members who looked like they wished they were anywhere else. She had convened this public hearing under the official title, Review of HOA Land Management Procedures in Ridgewood County, neutral enough to avoid accusations of targeting anyone specific, pointed enough that everyone in the room knew exactly why they were there. Gerald Hutchins sat in the front row, wearing a charcoal suit and a red tie, his expression carefully composed into something between boredom and mild amusement. Sheriff Dale Lewis sat 2 rows behind him, arms crossed, scanning the crowd like he was looking for trouble. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a seat near the back. I had a laptop bag at my feet containing a portable projector, a USB drive, and 47 pages of printed exhibits. Judith Evans sat beside me, legal pad open, pen ready. We had agreed she would handle any procedural objections while I presented the evidence. The plan was simple: let the documents speak. No accusations, no emotional appeals, no speeches about justice or corruption, just facts, laid out in sequence, forcing Gerald to respond to contradictions he couldn't explain away. Diana Martin called the hearing to order at 6 p.m. sharp. She read a brief statement about the purpose of the review, concerns raised by community members about transparency in property transactions, questions about the relationship between HOA governance and private business interests. Gerald shifted in his seat but didn't interrupt. Then she invited public comment. 3 residents spoke first, 2 defending Gerald, praising his decades of service to the community, and 1 asking vague questions about HOA fee structures. The defenders were polished, almost rehearsed. Gerald nodded along like a politician accepting endorsements. When my turn came, I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the council's projection system. The screen flickered to life behind Diana Martin's head. "My name is Dylan Anderson," I said. "I'm an attorney licensed in the state of Texas, and I'm the legal heir to 120 acres of land in Ridgewood County, including full mineral rights, inherited from my uncle, Roy Anderson, who passed away 8 months ago." I clicked to the first slide. This is the original deed, recorded in 1988. It clearly states that Roy Anderson held complete ownership of the property, including surface rights and mineral rights, with no encumbrances or easements. I clicked again. This is Amendment 12B, which Mr. Hutchins presented to me 7 weeks ago. It claims that my uncle transferred mineral rights to the Ridgewood Rural HOA in November 2005. I paused. The signature at the bottom is alleged to be my uncle's. I clicked to the third slide, a side-by-side comparison. On the left, the signature from Amendment 12B, clean, steady, perfectly formed. On the right, medical records from Midland Memorial Hospital, dated September 2005. Diagnosis of late-stage Parkinson's disease. Documented loss of fine motor control. Physician's note stating patient was unable to perform basic manual tasks, including writing. "My uncle could not hold a pen in November 2005, I said. "He could not sign his name. The signature on Amendment 12B is not his." The room had gone quiet. I could feel the weight of attention shifting, the skepticism in some faces giving way to uncertainty. Gerald Hutchins was no longer smiling. I clicked to the fourth slide, the HOA board minutes from August 2020. This document was provided to me by an anonymous source who attended the meeting in question. Agenda Item 4, Acquisition Strategy for Dormant Mineral Rights. The minutes describe a presentation by Mr. Hutchins outlining a plan to identify properties with unclear title status, approach owners with assistance offers, and consolidate rights under HOA-affiliated entities. I zoomed in on the handwritten note in the margin. One board member wrote, "Is this even legal?" I let that hang for a moment. Then I clicked to the fifth slide. This is a corporate filing from the Texas Secretary of State's office. 3 years ago, Mr. Hutchins registered a single-member LLC called Ridgewood Energy Partners. 6 months after registration, that LLC signed a preliminary agreement with Permian Energy for mineral extraction rights covering 8 properties in this county. I clicked again. Here is the list of properties included in that agreement. 7 of them were transferred to Mr. Hutchins's control through signatures I believe were forged. The 8th is my uncle's land, the land Mr. Hutchins is now trying to claim through Amendment 12B. I turned to face Gerald directly. "Mr. Hutchins, you told me that the mineral rights to my uncle's property belong to the HOA, but according to this agreement, the entity that will profit from those rights is not the HOA, it's your personal LLC." Gerald stood up before anyone could stop him. His face had gone red, the careful composure cracking. "This is a setup," he said, his voice rising. "This man has been harassing our community for weeks. He's stolen confidential documents, manipulated witnesses, and now he's standing here making accusations based on fabricated evidence." Diana Martin raised her hand. "Mr. Hutchins, you'll have an opportunity to respond. Please wait until—" "I will not wait," Gerald snapped. "This is defamation. This is a conspiracy. He broke into my office and stole those files. I want him arrested." Sheriff Lewis started to rise from his seat. Judith stood up beside me and spoke clearly into the silence. For the record, every document presented tonight was obtained through lawful means, public records requests, witness testimony, and voluntary disclosure. We have documentation of the chain of custody for each exhibit. She turned to Gerald. If Mr. Hutchins believes any of these documents are fabricated, he's welcome to submit them for forensic analysis. We would welcome that examination. Gerald opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a woman in the third row stood up. She was in her 60s, gray-haired, wearing a simple floral dress. Her voice shook slightly, but her words were clear. My name is Beverly Thornton. I've been on the HOA board for 11 years. She took a breath. I was at that meeting in 2020. I wrote that note. Is this even legal? Because I didn't understand what Gerald was proposing, and when I asked questions, he told me not to worry about it. She looked directly at Gerald. I never voted for any of this. The minutes say the motion passed unanimously, but that's not true. I abstained. 2 others abstained. Gerald recorded it as unanimous anyway. The room erupted. Voices overlapping, people standing, Sheriff Lewis pushing toward the front. Diana Martin banged her gavel 3 times before the noise subsided. This hearing is now part of an official record, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Mr. Hutchins, I strongly advise you to consult an attorney before making any further statements. Anything you say here tonight may be used in subsequent proceedings. Gerald stared at her, then at me, then at Beverly Thornton. For the first time since I had met him, he looked afraid. The hearing ended at 9:47 p.m. But the consequences started rolling the next morning. Diana Martin filed a formal request with the Texas Attorney General's office before noon, attaching the full transcript of the hearing, Beverly Thornton's testimony, and every exhibit I had presented. By 3 p.m., my phone rang with an Austin area code. The investigator on the other end introduced himself as David Chen, Civil Litigation Division. He had reviewed my original complaint and wanted to schedule a formal interview. We're opening a preliminary investigation into potential real estate fraud in Ridgewood County, he said. Your documentation is comprehensive. I told him I could be in Austin by the end of the week. He said that wouldn't be necessary. They were sending a team to Midland. Judith called me an hour later with more news. Permian Energy just terminated its preliminary agreement with Ridgewood Energy Partners, she said, effective immediately. Their legal team cited unresolved title disputes and material misrepresentations regarding ownership status. I asked what that meant in practical terms. It means Gerald's deal is dead, millions of dollars in extraction rights, gone, and it gets better, she paused. Their attorneys have indicated they may cooperate with state investigators. They don't want any association with a fraud case. They're going to hand over every communication they ever had with Gerald, emails, contracts, internal memos, everything. Gerald Hutchins had spent 3 years building a pipeline from forged signatures to oil money. In 1 week, that pipeline had collapsed. The dominoes kept falling. 2 days after the hearing, the Ridgewood County Board of Supervisors announced that Martha Campbell had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review of records management procedures. The official statement was carefully neutral. No accusations, no admission of wrongdoing. But everyone understood what it meant. Someone had finally looked at the county recorder's office and found what I had suspected all along, a pattern of selective filing, convenient delays, and documents that appeared in the system years after they were supposedly recorded. Martha Campbell had been Gerald's gatekeeper. Now the gate was open. Sheriff Dale Lewis made his move the same day. A brief statement released through the county spokesperson announced that the sheriff was taking personal leave to address family matters, and that Deputy Chief Harold Warren would assume interim command of the department. No timeline for return was provided, no explanation was offered, but the timing spoke for itself. 48 hours after a public hearing, where his close association with Gerald Hutchins had been displayed for the entire community to see. The quiet title lawsuit moved faster than I expected, with Gerald's legal resources suddenly stretched thin and his key allies disappearing into administrative leave. His attorneys filed for a series of continuances that the Travis County judge denied one after another. The defendant has had ample opportunity to prepare a response, Judge Maria Santos wrote in her ruling. Further delays would prejudice the plaintiff's legitimate property interests. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend preparing with Judith, organizing exhibits, rehearsing testimony, and anticipating every possible defense Gerald's team might raise. But when Monday came, there was no defense. Gerald's attorneys appeared before Judge Santos and announced that their client would not contest the plaintiff's claims regarding mineral rights ownership. They did not explain. Judge Santos accepted the stipulation and issued her ruling from the bench. Dylan Anderson was the sole legal owner of the property and all associated mineral rights. Amendment 12B was declared void as a fraudulently executed document. The HOA lien was dismissed with prejudice for lack of legal basis. I walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunlight, carrying a certified copy of the judgment. Judith was beside me, already on her phone, coordinating with her office in Austin. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt something closer to exhaustion, the kind that comes after years of tension you didn't even know you were carrying. Uncle Roy's land was mine. The mineral rights were secure. The forged document that Gerald had waved in my face 7 weeks ago was now officially worthless. But I knew this wasn't over. The quiet title case was civil. The real consequences, the ones that would determine whether Gerald Hutchins spent the rest of his life in prison, were still coming. My phone buzzed. Judith's name was on the screen, even though she was standing 3 feet away. She held up her own phone, showing me an incoming call. "It's the FBI field office in Dallas," she said quietly. "They want to talk." She answered, listened for about 2 minutes, asked 3 short questions, then hung up. Her expression was unreadable. "They executed a search warrant this morning," she said. "Hutchins' land and title, 15 years of records seized, property files, correspondence, financial documents, everything." I asked about Gerald. "Arrested at 6 a.m., at his residence, wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud across multiple properties. They're treating it as a RICO case." She paused. "Bail was denied, flight risk." I stood there on the courthouse steps, watching cars pass on the street below. Gerald Hutchins had built his empire on paper, forged signatures, fabricated documents, manipulated records. He had counted on the complexity of the system to hide his crimes, on the loyalty of local officials to protect him, on the ignorance and exhaustion of his victims to keep them from fighting back. He had been right about all of those things for 20 years. And then he met someone who knew how to read paper better than he knew how to forge it. Judith touched my arm. "There's going to be a press conference tomorrow. The U.S. Attorney's Office is announcing charges. They've invited you to attend, not to speak, just to be present. They want the community to see that this started because one person refused to let it go." I thought about Uncle Roy, sitting in his farmhouse with his tin box of documents, writing letters he knew might never be read, keeping records because someday someone might need them. He had been fighting this battle alone for years. He had lost his health, his farm, and eventually his life without ever seeing justice. But he had left me everything I needed to finish what he started. "I'll be there," I said. The press conference took place on the steps of the federal courthouse in Midland. Cameras from 4 local news stations lined the sidewalk. Reporters clutched notepads and digital recorders. A small crowd of residents had gathered behind the press line, some curious, some angry, most just trying to understand how the man who had run their county for 2 decades had ended up in handcuffs. U.S. Attorney Rebecca Morales stood at the podium, flanked by 2 FBI agents and a representative from the Texas Attorney General's office. She read the charges in a flat, methodical voice: 18 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of mail fraud, 7 counts of conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and 1 count of racketeering under the RICO statute. The investigation had identified at least 8 victims across Ridgewood County, with forged documents dating back to 2003. Total estimated damages exceeded $4 million. Gerald Hutchins, if convicted on all counts, faced a maximum sentence of 45 years in federal prison. I stood at the edge of the crowd, near the back, watching without speaking. Judith had advised me to keep a low profile, let the federal prosecutors take the spotlight, avoid anything that might look like gloating or personal vendetta. This wasn't about me. It was about the system finally working the way it was supposed to. When the press conference ended, a few reporters approached me with questions. I declined CTO comment and walked to my rental car. There was one more stop I needed to make before leaving Ridgewood County. The memory care facility outside Dallas was quiet in the late afternoon. Aunt Maggie was sitting in a wheelchair by the window when I arrived, watching birds gather on the lawn outside. She didn't recognize me at first. Then something shifted in her eyes, and she reached for my hand. "Dylan," she said softly. "Roy's nephew." I pulled a chair beside her and sat down. I told her about the hearing, the lawsuit, and the FBI arrest. I told her that Amendment 12B had been declared void, that the land was legally mine, and that the mineral rights Uncle Roy had fought to protect were secure. I told her that Gerald Hutchins was going to prison, and that the people who had helped him were facing consequences of their own. She listened without interrupting, her grip on my hand tightening as I spoke. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Roy always knew they were trying to steal from him. He just didn't live long enough to prove it." I told her that he had proved it. Every letter he wrote, every document he saved, every note in that tin box, it had all mattered. She smiled, the first real smile I had seen from her since the funeral. "He would have liked you," she said. "He always said you were the stubborn one in the family." The legal process moved forward over the following months, with the grinding inevitability of federal prosecution. Gerald Hutchins rejected a plea deal in September and went to trial in January. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 18 counts. Judge William Patterson sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison and ordered restitution of $2.3 million to be distributed among his victims. Martha Campbell pleaded guilty to 3 counts of falsifying public records and received 3 years in federal custody. Sheriff Dale Lewis was removed from office by the county board and indicted on 4 counts of obstruction of justice. His case was still pending when I left Texas for good. Eric Hernandez testified at Gerald's trial and was granted immunity for his cooperation. He moved to New Mexico the week after the verdict, looking for a fresh start. The other families got their land back. Judge Santos issued quiet title rulings for all 7 properties identified in Eric's files, restoring mineral rights to the legal heirs. Patricia Brennan called me the day her father's property was officially cleared. "We never thought this would happen," she said, her voice breaking. "We had given up years ago. Thank you." Marcus Odom sent me an email with a photograph attached, him standing on his grandfather's land for the first time since childhood, smiling in front of a rusted tractor that Samuel Odom had once driven. I printed the photo and pinned it above my desk. Permian Energy reached out 6 weeks after Gerald's conviction. They wanted to negotiate a new extraction agreement, this time with the actual legal owner of the mineral rights. Judith handled the contract. The terms were favorable, a signing bonus, annual royalties, and environmental protections written into the lease. The estimated value over 20 years was $4.7 million. I donated the first year's royalty payment to a legal aid fund for elderly landowners facing property fraud. It wasn't enough to fix everything Gerald had broken, but it was a start. The Ridgewood Rural HOA was dissolved by unanimous vote of the remaining board members in March. A new community association formed in its place, with elected leadership and transparent financial reporting. Beverly Thornton was elected president. She sent me a handwritten note a few weeks later. "We should have listened sooner. Thank you for not giving up on us." I kept the note in the same tin box where Uncle Roy had stored his documents. It seemed like the right place for it. I visited the farm one last time before returning to Houston. The fields were overgrown, the barn roof sagging, the house silent and empty, but the land was still there, 120 acres of Texas dirt that my uncle had refused to surrender, no matter how many times they came for it. I walked to the spot where the old property marker stood, half buried in weeds, and looked out across the horizon. Somewhere beneath my feet, oil waited in the darkness. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that the land belonged to the people it was supposed to belong to. What mattered was that the truth had survived long enough to be heard. My phone buzzed, an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "I think the same thing happened to my father's land in Oklahoma. Can you help?" I read the message twice, then saved it to a folder I had labeled pending. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a process, slow, exhausting, and never quite finished. But someone had to do the work. Someone had to follow the paper trail until it led somewhere that mattered. Uncle Roy had taught me that, and I wasn't done learning.